Okay, wonderful. So great to see everyone tonight, and welcome to Conversations with Christina. This is a wonderful way for all of us to have these conversations about things that are important in our lives and really join the conversation for those of you who are also joining us live. So tonight, our conversation is the practice of conscious creativity. Before we dive in and introduce you to these fabulous other women who are joining me tonight, just want to point out a few things for those of you who are joining us live. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so you can jump in and ask us questions, as well as a chat button if you want to jump in and offer any comments or anything as we go along. So thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm going to start with an invitation to all of you. An invitation to see if you can settle into your own creative space as we dive into this conversation tonight. I am happy to welcome Dawn Harding. Dawn Harding is a mother of 7, a multimedia artist, primarily a painter, a poet, and a feminist. For her, creativity is all about expression, cultural commentary, active meditation, and many times has been a mechanism for healing. Over the years, Dawn has been engaging people with art, from women living in shelters to her children, her friends, and community in a variety of different ways. These days, she now works as a therapist. I'm happy to have her part of my team, and her children are blossoming into their own lives. As an artist, she is moving into a process that invites conversation within and between viewers about their work, about the work. Femininity and feminine voices that entwine with evocative landscapes are overarching themes in a body of work that now spans more than 20 years. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Hi, guys.
Hi.
We also have Natasza Zurek. So Natasza's words: as a visionary artist, I use the visual language to create dimensions of possibility so that I may best contribute during this transition as humanity shifts towards the awareness of becoming an interconnected, biocentric, non-rivalrous global community. Each painting I create serves as a prayer and a vote towards this conscious co-creation of our imagined future. Awesome. Welcome, Natasza.
Thanks for having me.
Yay. And Shauna Harper. Shauna is a born dreamer, storyteller, and artist. In her day job, she is a marketing strategist at Live Work Communications, who works mainly with nonprofits. Prior to moving to Prince George, she owned a creative company for 10 years, wholesaling her artwork, inspirational magnets, and gift cards across Canada, the USA, and had distributors set up in Australia, UK, and Singapore. Welcome, Shauna.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to be here. Hello.
Yeah. Oh, so lovely to have all of you women here today. It's artists and conscious creators. I love that piece. So I want to start tonight by fielding the question of what is conscious creativity? What is conscious creativity to you? Dawn, do you want to start and dive in?
I knew that was going to happen.
Did you?
Well, I think over time, that process has really changed for me. When I was younger, it was always about being inspired. You know, there was some slice of light or some radiant color that just set off of some flow of spirit or imagination or skill or lack thereof. And but over time, I realized that actually it's not inspiration that is the most important piece. It's actually showing up. And the process of showing up is one of, I think, one of discipline and contemplative process or even habit. And I mean, we show up in different ways. I don't always go to my studio, but I think that it's a really important piece to reflect on the fact that the work is going to evolve in its own time, and it's going to shift, and it's going to draw me and other people in different ways. And so, this notion of a cohesive body of work is not always
Mm-hmm.
the desired goal. Sometimes it occurs, but this notion of creating consciously is really for me about an active meditation on the process of living in the world.
An active meditation on the process of living in the world. Wow. Wow. And I think you've used the word before, social commentary. Would that be fair?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, years ago when I was working with women living in a shelter, the idea was that the art that they created could be an expression of their expertise on the topic of homelessness through experiential stories and narratives. And that had a really profound impact on the community that viewed that exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have the capacity as artists to, create the reflections of the world that we see and what we also think and feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of doing that is a conversation with the materials. And that product then becomes part of a conversation with viewers and between viewers, and that evolves in its own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a piece around creativity empowering further creativity, like a spark,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
wonderful. Cool. Thank you so much for that. Natasza, how about you? How would you define what conscious creativity means to you?
So I think there's so many ways to define conscious and talk about conscious creativity that probably this whole conversation talking, we're going to be defining it from all its multifaceted angles. So just to start it off for me, something that comes to mind is when my vehicle of creativity is painting. And so when I'm painting in the flow state, I feel then I'm engaged with conscious creativity because it's a state in which I'm not really hindered by the past and not really projecting too far into the future. And it allows me to be in a present moment and with the feeling and what I'm currently processing to be able to be released through my brush strokes onto the canvas. And
there was a piece there that you were talking about the flow state, right? That flow state of being in the presence of the flow state.
yes. Well, another thing I'll say is about using our art as a tool of manifestation, because when we are in that flow state, we can be in the feeling. And at that point, when we're creating the vision, then the feeling that we're able to tap into when we're in the present moment gives a lot of power to that vision. And so that is also helpful, even if you're doing a doodle, if you're allowing yourself to feel the feeling. That's why I think drawing can actually be a tool accessible to many people, and that you don't have to do it in perfection because it's the feeling that's the driver behind what you're engaged with at that moment.
I love that. I never considered that before. In that piece around really focusing and being conscious and intentional about what is the feeling that this is evoking. Is it about the feeling that comes up as a result of it, or is it about engaging in the feeling that is emerging and creating what's happening?
I think if I understand it correctly, it's more like a feedback loop where you come into it with the feeling and then you get the feedback through your creation and awareness and insight, which then can loop you into a different feeling.
Wow. I love that idea. That's very cool.
And just one last thing that is coming to mind now, for me, it's conscious creativity is very important because I'm a curious person, and I know many people are, and we bring in information from the outside world, and then we kind of process and churn the information in our inner world. And so then it's our expression of our understanding and our feeling in the current moment based on all the input that everyone else has given us. And then our expression of that then influences everyone else that had given me the influence or the information. And so if we're really in touch with who we are, if we take the time, then we can express our unique perspective. And so then we're contributing novelty to the world and to our each other's shared experience. And so that makes life very exciting. And I think that's also what helps us to have purpose and meaning when we engage in creativity.
Wow, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, real purpose, right? To engaging. Because it is, I like that piece around it. We take in all the data, we churn it around inside, and then there's an expression of it, right? That's our unique perspective. And, I tend to look at the world in a way in which we are all just, aspects of consciousness are forming itself, and we all have our own unique perspective that we're sharing and mirroring to each other. And I think that's fabulous. Yeah. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I would just encourage that the more of ourselves that we can share with the world, the more we benefit ourselves and each other and the world.
And exactly as we are, not as in like, oh, I have to be a perfected version somehow of myself. I have to be this kind of artist. I have to be, because that is no longer authentically who we are. And I think a lot of people hold back from sharing their creations in whatever form they are.
That's why I mentioned the flow state, because that's the state that you're not having so much judgment and working by expectation, either by your own expectation or external expectation.
Wonderful. Cool. Thank you so much, Natasza, for that. So Shauna, how about you? When you think about conscious creativity, and I think your website is even consciously creative? Is that what it is?
My blog is consciously creative. I love what both of the ladies have said, because I see it, the curiosity piece, that's a big piece for me. Like that to me is how I tap into creativity, is that being curious. But there's also that side where kind of the pre-kids me and the post-kids me, kind of the pre-kids. Yeah, I had this studio that I went to, and it was where I was creative. And then I started that blog in 2009 because I kind of had my kids 2007, 2008. And I realized it's not just a space that I'm creative, but it's a being. And it's this intentional awareness of the parts that are kind of creative that I do, from gardening to opening my fridge and being like, what's for dinner tonight? What can I whip up that's going to be fun and creative? And then a big part of my blog when I first started was really observing the creativity that was just so naturally innate in these kids, that it wasn't like they were like, okay, I'm going to do art and be creative in this subject for this hour. But it was actually like everything from their conversations to the way they changed voices, to the way they dressed up, to all of those things. And for me, one of the laws that I know for sure is what you focus on expands. And I just wanted to be able to focus more on that creativity without it having kind of that box. And now that my kids are kind of more, they're tweens, and so they're more guarded than they used to be. I'm finding I need to almost push my own boundaries a little more, because I can't tap that from them the way I could when they're younger. And so now I do have an art studio, and I do have this space and time, and I'm looking for peers that are intentionally focused on art and on creativity and on bringing in that kind of energy and that awakening into them. And so I think conscious is just intentional, focused, awake. Those are kind of the words I associate with that. So
yeah, awake. I picked that up. You said create an awakening within them.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Create that awakening within them?
I think it's within everyone. I work with a lot of people that say, I'm not creative. I'm not like that. I'm not like you, kind of. And it's so funny because even in my business work that is quite structured and quite business-like, I'll bring in Jiffy markers, and that's my creative side. Or I'll use certain colors, and it's my creative side. And I just see it that if people were still enough and quiet enough and probably why now I bring in meditation. And so I'm focusing on this 42 days straight meditation piece, to be able to silence and bring in the stillness, to awaken what I think is already in everyone, but we're just so busy and moving and in motion that when we're still, that stuff starts to bubble up. And that's the creative stuff. That's the flow. That's the river that's running, regardless of whether we're tapping into it. And so that conscious part is that, hey, it's all around us. We just have to tap in, right? So
slow down enough, be still enough to hear, to be present to what emerges. Yeah. Wow.
100%.
Yeah. And in each one of you have mentioned something that has touched upon this space, whether it's the flow state or the still space, or Dawn even talked about just like showing up to that space, being present to that space. I'm really curious if from people that are watching, like, I guess like, how do you experience that place? Like, what is flow? I mean, I think we could again do probably another hour, a whole hour on just like defining what flow is, but I'm really interested in what that experience feels like to you when you create that space for yourself.
Well, for myself, the times when I've experienced it the most intensely, they are absolutely and always the best paintings, the best poems, and they fall out. And I am absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, convinced that I can never charge by time, because they usually happen quite quickly. And they're not like, they just came through me. They are not something that I made. I didn't conceive of them. I didn't have the skill to execute that consciously. It was just something that, for whatever reason, light and space and energy and pigment all came together to form something beautiful.
I've read the book The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if anyone has read that book. And one of the things that he says in that is, he said essentially that artists and creatives are like mothers, in the fact that we do not create as much as we give birth to. And I like that. When you even said it falls out of me, I was thinking about like children, right? It's like it falls. And Natasza, when we spoke prior to this, you had talked about the fact that you believe your art already exists somewhere, and it's really just coming through you in some way.
Yes. To answer your question to tie the answer into your question about flow state, my feeling when I'm in the flow is one of like true excitement and joy. And it's literally like I feel like I'm playing with God, and God is playing with me. And God, where's God? Well, he's somewhere or everywhere, he, she, it. And I feel like my soul is almost projected into another dimension. And when I'm in that place, it's like a parade of artwork. And some of those artworks can be mine, and they're just waiting for me to show up at the easel and create the time and the dedication to brushstroke by brushstroke manifest it into our 3D reality. So sometimes I think of it that we as artists, there's like fields of potentiality. And when I create a painting, I collapse a wave of potentiality into an artifact, which in scientific terms, the wave collapses into the particle. But in my terms, the potentiality of a painting collapses into an artifact, which then I can present to everyone in the 3D world. And the way I think about it is then we can engage the flow state in each other, because then I'm like, hey, look at this shiny new flashy painting. And everyone's like, ooh, that's so great. And then they're like, hey, look at this. And then everyone else is like getting mutually excited by everyone's engagement and involvement and self-expression. Again, I think that's super important.
What's super important, that the engagement piece?
Self-expression, because that's what we need in order to achieve connection and engagement,
Yeah.
which is what gives us meaning, like in our life.
Self-expression gives us meaning or connection?
All of like the result of the connection that we feel through being ourselves, that true connection.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, our greatest purpose is to be who we are.
Yeah.
And so many of us spend so much time trying to be someone else who we think that everyone else wants us to be.
So much easier being yourself.
True story. Yeah.
True story. So thank you. Shauna, how about for you? Like, what is that flow state like for you?
It's funny because this morning, I don't know if anyone else woke up and looked at social media and thought I need to go back to bed. Just with all the stuff in the news and everything like that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go through a meditation. And then life happened and kind of went through my day. And of course, chaos to do with raising kids kind of came through as well. And then I was like, I have to be on this call tonight and talk about creativity and be somewhat grounded. I can't be as frazzled and as chaotic. And it's interesting because I've been doing my meditation practice, I feel like that channel is quite open. And so when I need to be, it doesn't take as long to tap back into that. And so that was something where I was like, I just need 20 minutes. You know, that's all I need is 20 minutes. And I started around 5 o'clock knowing that we needed to be on this call at 7. And I like churned out 5 paintings and I was like, where did that just come from?
Awesome.
And it was from a friend of mine and I talking, and we were kind of going down that spiral, and I'm like, and the world is coming to an end. And she's like, but the only way we can show up is to bring the light. And she's like, what is that for you? And I was like, okay, I got to get off this call. And because I could feel myself rapidly unraveling, complaining about my day and complaining about what I see. And then I was like, no, what is it? And it was interesting because I went in thinking I was going to paint my houses and those things. And then I ended up painting angel wings. You know, I haven't painted angel.
Do you want to show some of your?
Yeah, I haven't painted angel wings before. And I painted angel wings. And I was just like, so I painted that one. And then this one here. And it was all something that normally my paintings don't take very long. But the process of getting them onto canvas can take years. Years upon years. And then when I'm in the flow, they just churn and churn. And I was like, I don't have enough canvases. I need more canvases, kind of thing. And yeah. And so I was just this gratitude that this conversation was happening. And also the other pieces where you almost need a bit of a fire and you almost need the other pushes and pulls in the universe sometimes to get you to awaken, like to say, okay, but what can I intentionally focus on and notice what I'm focusing on isn't working. And that was that conversation I had with a great friend of mine that is so good at virtually, giving me the slap and just being like, kind of like you when I talk to you, Christina, kind of like, okay, what is it that you really want to focus on? So,
yeah. So it sounds like, this friend anyways, kind of helped you to refocus, right? And reminded you of something that you already know.
I know. And
that's what we're doing in this life, right? I really feel like as humans, often it's just a process of forgetting and remembering the same things over and over again. Right? One of the things that I love that I'll always cherish is I went to a course and there was the man who ran it, his name was Daniel Goodenough. And I asked him about that because I created, my company named Repiphany out of the idea of the fact that we have these aha moments, but the only reason they're an aha moment is because it already existed within us, right? There's aha as a remembering of something that we feel like it's the first time, but it's not an epiphany, it's a repiphany. So I was telling him about that idea of like, I think we forget and remember. And he said to me, the forgetting is optional. And I was like, okay, gotta slunk away a little bit.
Yeah.
And until I'm at that place, I often need people and sometimes a structure or a reminder to step back into what I know is true. Right?
I often use that quote, we're walking each other home. And I don't think I noticed it as much when I was just growing up as I did when I was raising my kids, about how natural it is at the beginning for them to tap into that true essence of themselves. And I have to be so cognizant as a parent, because I like order and I like well-behaved kids and all of those clean, fancy, nice things that people want. And you can so easily throttle that joy without realizing it, you know, and I do it, and I'm constantly doing that dance even today. So
yeah, doing and undoing. And you're right. I do think that we are naturally born creators, and there's just a lot more freedom to our ability to express, and less demands and responsibility, and less conditioning. I think that's the thing, right? Like, we don't have as much conditioning when we first emerge, right, as humans, and then all of that stuff starts to come on board. So Natasza, did you want to add something here?
Yes, when you were talking about
Forgetting and remembering.
oh yeah, the remembering. I just thanks. Okay, so I look at artwork and any kind of creative expression, like whether it's gardening or whatever, cooking, or, well, in my case, it's artwork. But it's the purpose and the journey of the art, I think, is also to create worlds that we hope to, or visions that we hope to come into, and things that we are attracted to, that we want to bring more of into our lives. That's why I speak about a tool of manifestation. Like, you have a vision of and for me, one of my main visions is that I would like to be, and all of us to be, living more in a community where the lifestyle is one where we help each other remember. So it's a mutually supportive dynamic flow between everyone, that even if we forget that day, we'll definitely remember by the end of the day, because we are surrounded by people that are in alignment and in with their purpose to live that as well.
Wow. I love that. Like an emerging humanity, right? In which we are all co-creating together for our highest good.
Yeah, and I feel like the paintings, they're such a beautiful and wonderful way to help that come alive, even though that we may not necessarily be living it just yet. But it's beauty, and people are attracted to beauty. So it's a great way to create an environment and a certain vibe.
It sounds like a doorway of some sort, an invitation.
Yeah, exactly, an invitation. And then the bit about conversation, because when we create these paintings, then now is the chance for people that don't necessarily paint can now be invited to also engage in the conversation that the painting is representing.
Wonderful. Do you have, all of you have some art that you may or may not want to share at certain points, but do you have something at this point that you wanted to share, or are you going to let that bubble up when it's ready?
Oh, I'll share. But I was just wondering if Dahne wanted to comment on anything we were recently.
Dawn, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I guess the piece for me about the remembering is really interesting, because I've many times created a painting that sometimes I worked on it and completed it, in an hour, and sometimes it took me years, right? Like, it would get to a certain point and then just be stuck. And then one day I was just like, I know what to do. And it's for that person. And that has happened many times. And often I find that, when I look at my work, I've told my story, but I've also told my future. Like, I can see things that are very important in that process of creating that work. That is, it does draw on the past and whatever present I'm in at that time. But, and it takes the 2020 hindsight to say, hey, wait, I actually knew ahead of time where that was going. I just couldn't identify. I couldn't name, I couldn't categorize, I couldn't qualify at that time what that experience was. But looking back on it, I can see that it was an important piece for sure.
Wow.
I will agree with that. That's happened to me too. And I feel sometimes that the creative state is a state that has no time. And it's a place that where you are out of time. Therefore, you may actually be able to express things that are actually going to happen in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess it also depends on your view of time and whether you think time is linear or not. I think there's a whole other conversation that could open up.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Did you want to share something now, Natasza?
Well, yeah, sure. I'll pop on a few of my paintings through screen share.
Yeah.
Is that the time now?
Yep.
Okay. Right. Oops. Can you see it?
Nope.
Not yet. Did you click share your screen at the bottom?
Oh, right. Okay. There we go.
No problem. Here we go. So right now we're looking at your desktop. There we go.
So can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a self-portrait that I did at one of the workshops. I attended with my teacher, Amanda Sage, and she's a very well-known visionary artist that is quite well known around the world. And she teaches and invites a lot of people to paint. But anyways, her main subject matter whenever you visit her workshop is the self-portrait. So this is my first attempt at a self-portrait. And I just thought I'd bring it up and show like the power of what a self-portrait can do. So when you're like sitting and looking in the mirror and engaging yourself and spending time just sitting and looking at yourself, you have an opportunity to like look deeper within, and it's also a quite a healing act, because you're able to have the opportunity to accept things about yourself on the physical appearance. Like in the case of a self-portrait, when I was seeing that I had wrinkles and I was actually really quite like in dread of painting the wrinkles. I didn't want to accept that I was like in a human body and aging. And so, but I felt that in order to progress, that it's a good idea to be brave and just observe, and without judgment as best as you can. And then you create what you see. And then in this case of this self-portrait, there's the aspect of duality, which I think a lot of people in life's experience, we often have our highs and our lows, or our angelic state and our worst state, and which also in this painting expresses itself in our world. So on the right side is I would say like my soul body that is able to observe with gentleness. On the left side, which is represented in a bit more agony and in despair of like the world crises and the situation in our world. Next painting is another self-portrait. And this is again another theme of duality. And so that's the thing with self-portraits, is that you get to process these things that are happening inside of you. And it again, also processing the light and the dark. And this painting is of my yoga teacher, which is now hanging in her yoga studio. And this is just a painting I've titled Joy Therapy, because I thought it would be so wonderful just to paint like the happiest person I could think of, with like flowers bursting in her head. And this last
Love this.
painting here that I'll show today is my daughter in the middle, and she collaborated with me and worked on the animals and the characters. As I set up the symmetry, she went in and put in all the little animal details. And then that's her in the middle. So I thought that was quite a nice collaboration to just get her looking at like a larger perspective of what's possible with art and like big canvases and more art materials. So I'll stop screen share now. We'll go back to us.
Perfect.
And just to finish up, I think you may notice that my paintings, there's a lot of symmetry. Like there's a lot of like direct looking at the viewer with a portrait or maybe with an animal. It's a lot of it is just direct. And I think part of the reason for that is that I'm trying to imbibe the painting with a lot of energy. And so the intention of the painting is to energetically help the viewer maybe tune to the frequency that the painting is emanating. So I think that the very symmetric direct is a very typical visionary art mode that you see often employed. And my understanding is that it's just a good way to like energetically tune people as they're viewing the painting.
And when I look at those paintings, I definitely feel something. Like there's definitely a transmission and a vibration and frequency that I can take from it. You talk a lot about the importance of the self-portrait and the self-portrait in terms of being able to look past judgment and just to be with what is. Is there anything else you want to say about like how important like the self-portrait is on our self-expression? Like if we're all just showing up as who we are, how important is that, the self-portrait?
Well, when you dedicate the time to sit there and observe yourself, you're also given an opportunity to just sit there and feel more. And when you can feel, you can listen with your heart and what is being said, like what your soul or what your true self is attempting to communicate with you.
Dedicating that time, right? To be with yourself.
Exactly. And then you may break through actually into a new understanding or a new awareness because you've taken the time to live in a different pattern and to observe different patterns as you go within and observe your face or maybe the feelings that are associated.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced that more so like as well when I do like eye gazing with another person. Like at some point in that process, who they are almost falls away, right? Like what the surface of what I'm seeing starts to fall away and something else emerges. Like I can see past what the image is into something much deeper. Beautiful. Do either one of you want to comment a little bit on the self-portrait or seeing past what is?
Beautiful
Sure.
artwork. Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Such detail and just gorgeous.
Yeah, it's quite funny because you'll do 5 paintings in 1 hour and I'll do 1 painting in 500 hours.
So different, so different. Yeah.
Right. So different and at the same time, like all important aspects. And I think that's really important because I think there'll be people watching this who are going to start to judge themselves and be like, well, I'm not that kind of artist. You know, I'm not that creative or I'm not good enough or starting that comparison ego game. So how would you support people who get into that space? What advice would you give them, Dawn? Like for people who were in that place of like, oh, I couldn't do something like she can.
Well, I mean, I would just invite a simple comparison. You know, you have 3 people sitting here who arguably call themselves artists, and you've seen 3 very, very different kinds of work. You know, I think that someone can say, well, I could never do what Natasza does. And I say, well, me either. That's not my thing. Or, if somebody will say to me, well, my kindergartner could paint what you paint. And I say, well, great. Invite your kindergartner to come and play. That's great. Right. So I think that what it really boils down to is inviting people to trust their own voice, because that conversation with the media is the process that you come to hear yourself. And I think that, in the same way that the self-portrait is that conversation of and with becoming present with your heart, arguably, I think that for me, I don't ever start with a drawing, ever. I simply start to commit color to the surface and then allow whatever to emerge. And so for me, actually, there's only one exception to that rule, and it's this painting to my left.
Let's see that one.
Which I'm not sure if you can see it from that angle. Can you see it?
Yes.
No.
Yep.
Yes.
It was better when it was down, I think.
Yes, right there. So despite the distortion, it's actually two ravens that are scavenging on basically a body. And it is the only narrative painting that I have ever completed. And I had a dream once where I woke up thinking that ravens were eating my legs. Turned out to be a cat, but that's beside the point. The cat was grabbing at my toes. But I understand that there's a legend in which Odin, the king of the gods, has two ravens that he sends out daily. And one is Onan and the other Munin. And their names mean thought and memory. And every day he sends them out and he prays that they come back. And I, at that time in my life, was really recognizing that holding on to the past is a really, it's a really surefire way to handicap yourself. And, our bodies are this vessel that we travel through the world and time and society and culture and all those pieces. And the lens that we hold is often construed and constructed from the past. And unfortunately, that actually influences how able and capable we are of moving forward. And so, yeah, but even that painting was not like, I had this sort of general idea about what I wanted to do, but I didn't make a plan. It evolved completely on its own. And the raven with its head down, which is the one closest to your head, Christina, when you look at it straight on, it actually looks like it's moving. And it was in fact pure accident, that because I'd made an error and I went to wipe it with a rag, and the rag did this on the canvas, and what it did is it effectively made it blurry. And so it looks almost like stop motion. And it was really interesting to me that, I could have gotten all worked up about how that was a mistake. But I'm really not interested in mistakes in art. I'm interested in how they evolve with their own life and they become their own process. And I just have to be open to it and allow that to happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes they get hung up for years. And then suddenly it's like, I didn't live enough to understand what it needed. And that's why it takes 15 minutes or half an hour or half a day and it's done. And in fact, it has a person that it needs to go to. Right. And that's a really big piece for me, and just recognizing that it's not about the form of your idea doesn't matter for me. The only thing that matters is the manifestation of the idea. and it's allowed to evolve as it wants to, not as I want it to.
Wow. Wow. You said something about just that part of this process that's so important is the dance between the media and the materials, and the, like, it's you know, not focusing so much on the end product, but focusing on the relationship between you and the piece, and then all the materials.
Yeah, one of my fellow students, actually, when I was working on my graduate degree, defended me once because I am not good at portraits, Natasza. And or I don't really feel that it's my strong suit. But she defended me, and she said, you know, when push comes to shove, Dawn's a colorist. And I think that's what's true for me is those colors are broken light. And the idea that I can layer those and glaze those and mix those and play with those, and I know the relationships that they have with each other. I have no fear at all, ever, when I step into a canvas, ever, because I already know what how those relationships exist and how they can evolve depending on the circumstances. And it's not that it's not a formula. It's just, I know what they do. I know how they behave. I know which ones are transparent and translucent and opaque, and which ones look like dirt and which ones aren't, and which ones look like gems. And I love that. I love the play of light, because for me, that's what people are, right? Like, our experiences are literally refracted light, to me personally. And, you know, a physicist might disagree, but I love that color is broken light, and the relationships and the process of that is fascinating to me in a way I can't even explain.
I love the way you see the world. I think that they might agree. They're getting good at there as well.
That's such a wonderful vision, broken light. And I think that even inspires me to want to paint something along the lines that references broken light, which is so cool because we can all literally paint the same thing, but it'll never look the same.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
And I think that's where, if you have diverse friendships, you know, friendships that are not the same and the people aren't the same, then the judgment you have on your art, I mean, it's kind of like people aren't even comparable. They're not even the same. You're not even comparing the same thing, because they each have different value to you in different ways. Right. I've been reading Mr. Rogers's book, his biography, or a biography written about him. And someone had said to him at the time when Sesame Street had come out, like, aren't you worried about competition? Aren't you? And he's like, you guys are only reaching like 1,000 people compared to the, you know, however many. And he's just like, but that's like saying, this chili is really good and my grandma made it, but this restaurant down the road makes really good chili. He's like, it doesn't matter if the chili down the road's good. I want this chili, kind of. And it's just like this. He's like, it doesn't even make sense that people are comparing, because people are going to different artwork for different reasons. They're moved by different people for different reasons. And I think the older I get, and the more people that I meet that are come in and out of my life, for reasons and different seasons and those things, you realize that there's a place for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think what you're saying, like, for me there, what I pick up is, you know, in that way, art is really a commentary on a social narrative, in terms of, I think as humans, we're often looking for, I want to use the word homogeneity, but I don't know if that's the right word, but we want to be right, and we want people to follow one truth. Right? We often argue, and we want people to become more of who we are, right? And you know, I don't believe that the world is supposed to work like that. I think we're all supposed to offer our unique perspective, and that's how we grow and evolve. And I think art is one of those places, right? If we said that only, you know, your way or Dawn's way or Natasha's way was the right way, and we should all esteem towards that, you imagine like how much we would be missing in terms of like, we already, like as humans are taking like the smallest perspective on our lives, like, you know what I mean, in terms of like, we only see this much of the full spectrum of life. And I think that often, you know, what I see out in the world is people fighting over wanting everything to be one way. And I think, yes, there's one thing, one way could be a humanity that loves and support each other, but that cherishes the differences, that upholds it, that invites that conversation and the curiosity about how is it that you see it? I want to understand like this, you know. And even in my work as a relationship therapist, like that's where people keep getting stuck, right? Is people want, like, they want to be, you know, the other person to see their world their way, and they want, you know, to have one common thing. And instead, you know, what just shifts that completely is to step in with curiosity and interest.
That's why traveling is so important, and seeing other cultures, and just even the lens that people live their lives through. It's just, it changes the way you realize there's just no way they can be just one way. There's just no
absolutely
way.
Yeah. You know, as you were talking, Christina, I apologize, I reached out of the frame, and it made me think of a poem that I wrote once that's actually about this. Do you mind if I read it?
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
It says, erotic change, mesmerizing, twirling, a sweet, subtle thrill enchants me. The tickle behind my sternum that is the result of imagination's foreplay wells up and rushes in my ears. Phalo sighs and Pyrrole hums against my thumbs as I engage inside the ground rather than on it, and time folds in on itself. I am a child and a crone at once, falling into my imagination and talking out my wisdom before I am aware that it is mine, until finally, in what seems an eternity and a moment, the image and myself have become visible.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you sharing that piece.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It seemed relevant.
I saw you reaching. I was like, what is she getting? What is she?
I know. I was excited too.
I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. It was right there. It's like, I was like, oh, if I reach that ruler, can I do it without them seeing me?
Well, and what I love, what I see that's emerging here, there's an interplay already, right? Of how creation empowers further creation and further ideas. And I just love that. And we're experiencing that as we're going here. Right? And, you know, one of the things that I think about, yes, you know, the three of you are, you know, artists, and I think creativity comes in so many forms, and we've touched on that before, in that flow state. And one of the ways that I often think about, you know, that achievement of the flow state, or, you know, both Dawn and Natasza, you've talked about the liminal space, right? That blank space is, you know, I think about things like, you know, sacred sexuality, like you just talked about this erotic something, like, and, you know, when they've done studies, like Bruce Lipton has, like, you know, hooked people up with wires and stuff. And the only time that people stopped their actual, like, blah, 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 mind chatter was during sex and orgasm and sacred sexuality. So like, there's a huge, like, there's creation there, and in, you know, gardening, and, you know, in writing. And I find conversation to be creative if we choose it. Like, there's so many ways for anybody who's sitting there going, there's, you know, I'm not an artist. We are constantly in the process of creation.
Yeah, our words are really one of our first tools of creation.
Yeah, I love that.
And if you've ever worked with an amazing bookkeeper or accountant, like, there's a friend of mine that I work on contracts with, and he just has a way to simplify numbers that makes me okay with them. Like, I can't say I love them, but okay with them. And he is just that guy that just is so good at explaining numbers so that you don't feel, because to me, whenever it's to do with numbers, I get this overwhelm and anxiety and all those other things. And it's just like his creativity is numbers, right? Like he's able to have a calm around numbers, because to him that's order, that's logic, it's being able to scale, being, you know, all those things, the words he uses around it. I'm just like, yeah, I'm glad that's you.
Yeah, right. We all have our own unique expression of it. Yeah, fabulous. So there's a couple other things that I wanted to ensure that we touched on, and I talked to you guys a bit about this before we jumped on. So I was watching a TED Talk from Alex Gray, and this was what he had to say, and essentially is that art history is an arc of our evolution. The painter channels the creative force into the artifact and then becomes a battery ready to zap the viewer into a new way of seeing the world. And so I think what, you know, essentially what he's saying is, like, if you look back along the different art along the way, there's been a social commentary, there's been something that has meant to spark further evolution into the next step of humanity. And I think we're really in a place right now where, as artists and as creationists, we're in this place of I'll speak for myself, of wanting to comment on something next, something that we could birth as we emerge into something new. And so I'd be really interested in hearing, like, from the three of you, a bit about where you feel like you are right now in terms of influencing, like how you influence what is emerging in the world, and what you would love to see perhaps emerge. Like, where are you in that process? Natasza?
I could speak to that, because when you read my intro, I like to state that my artworks are like a vote and a prayer. And so through the creativity, I'm able to tap into the liminal space between thought and when it's manifested into reality. So that space in between the potentiality and thought, there is that liminal space, and that's where the creativity I can like source from there to create these paintings that then are serving as like a vote or a prayer, because I do spend hour after hour after hour on these paintings. So I'm literally like imbibing it with prayers, like that focus and attention. It is creating the actual piece, but it's also being channeled into the piece as well. And I feel like I'm safe to do that, because I rely on everyone else to do their self-expression. And so even if I'm not fully aware of all the right things that are going to serve humanity best, because I'm missing some piece of information, but I have sincerity to create something beautiful that will serve towards humanity, and then it's up to everyone else to put in their bit, and then in the end everyone's good bits will coalesce and rise to the surface of our shared experience. But we can't almost judge what's good and not good. Sometimes with creativity, you just gotta create it and then release it into the world, and then allow what may happen or whatever influence it can serve just to do its thing. Just like a prayer, when you send that prayer out into the world.
Wonderful.
I think sometimes too, sorry, Christina.
No, I was going to ask you, I could tell you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Sometimes too, I think what happens is we get a little ahead of ourselves. Back in, I don't know, 2002, 2003, I was creating a series of work on freedom as transgression. And it was about boundaries and boundary crossing. And it was my first conceptual work. And I'd opened a small pop-up gallery down on 4th Avenue, and people would come into the gallery, and they were often very derogatory about the work. Some people were polite enough to ask for an explanation, but it was often passed by for more representational work, and
Mm.
people were quite dismissive. And about 5 years later, after the university had come and, you know, we'd been a little bit more established, I participated in Art in the Park, which is a fundraiser for MS. And people would come and they would ask if they could touch it and talk to me and ask for explanations. And, you know, they were really engaged and interested in this work. And so, you know, people walking by in a park and people walking into an art gallery, there's not necessarily the same group of people, right? But it was very interesting to me to see how the culture and engagement with art had shifted in that time.
Right. So you're saying there's something about timing, that sometimes what has emerged is perhaps early for society, the 3D and
yeah, or something.
I see it also as like the people that might even like, you think of even how much our city has changed over those years as well. And so
That's
it's not
right.
necessarily that people have evolved, but it's just different people. And so what excites me so much about the online world is that you no longer have to worry if your immediate circle of friends don't like your work, or your immediate, you know, town doesn't like your work. The way the world's working now with technology, with like virtual reality and with artificial, what's it called, AI,
intelligence.
No, it's not. Is it? There's a way with art that you can actually place it into your living room to see whether or not it fits or is suitable. And so that means you also now open it from people in Canada, even to Australia, to the UK, to, you know, kind of globally, people that will end up being your circle of 1,000 people, you know. And so it's something where it no longer, you can just show up the way, whereas before, I think part of that conforming was feeding yourself or feeling like you needed to fit in. Whereas now it's like, show up anyway that's you, and from there figure out how to then send that out.
I would like to say, to add to that, because like I am on Instagram and online, like actively promoting my art and engaging with so many artists that do the same. And right now during COVID, we've also been jumping on something called the Vision Train, which is Zoom call that's basically running since March 24th, 24 hours a day, every day. And it's artists from all around the world. And it's about 1,500 people in that group.
Wow.
Any time of day you can jump on and paint with people and have conversations about interesting things or about your artwork. So what is interesting is that how often you see common themes arising from people all over the world, from India, from all over the USA, from Australia, from all over Europe. And so it's really seeming like, because of this access to the images so easily through technology, that there's definitely like this processing of global consciousness happening. And it's really fascinating to see people processing the same images, even though they haven't ever met, but only that they got the chance to show the images to each other because they happened to meet on the Vision Train. So I don't know really, I couldn't articulate exactly how this is affecting, but it's definitely doing something. And it's there's a movement, you know, and it's coming more alive. And I feel very optimistic when I see that. And it's very inviting movement and very engaging. That's why I don't necessarily want to present my art as like, oh, so great, and that then someone wanting to do a self-portrait would feel deterred, because it is about being engaged with the creative process, and it's not necessarily what your technical skill is. And if you had the interest, you could easily learn that any technical skill, because there's so many people out there now who are experienced and are happily wanting to share.
Thank you.
If you
But-
even look at the self-portraits of like Pablo Picasso, you know, kind of the childlike, bolder strokes and things, and then you compare them to all the different famous artists that people will know and all their self-portraits, they're so different.
Mhm.
And so if you want to close that door, you're going to close that door regardless of whether you know, but it just gives you an excuse to say, well, I can't draw like that, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But if you want other examples, there's many, many, many different examples.
Mhm.
So for people who want to dedicate more of their life to creative process, to being more in that space, to learning skill, or to just like, what advice would you have for people? Like, Dawn, what would you say to someone saying like, oh, you know, I mean, you probably heard it many times. Oh, I'd love to do that. I don't have time, or, you know, or I don't make it a priority, or whatever that is, or I wish I
Yeah.
would do. So what would you say to those people?
Well, for starters, it's taken me 30 years to feel like I could make time. I think there are some practical aspects to life that for sure make a difference. But I think that we can live in the world creatively in whatever space we're in. You know, I mean, for a long time, renovating houses was a multimedia 3-dimensional art project for me, because that was sort of one of my jobs as I was going through university. And, you know, raising children is deeply spiritually and mentally and emotionally and physically creative. I mean, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything that can top that stretch, you know. And so really when it boils down to it, I say, you know, if you're going to buy materials, buy the best ones you can afford and make art like you mean it every time. Don't practice, just do. And as you do, it evolves in its own time. And it's really about just having faith, right? I was telling Christina earlier, I had a temper tantrum because I'm trying to build a greenhouse and the wind blew the plastic off it last night. And being one person and trying to put plastic back on was just not okay. And it was hard and I was mad and I was frustrated. I was like, I should be able to do this. But you know what? That's all you do that's life, is just stepping up every day to say, I'm going to try this thing. And it doesn't matter if it's a Dr. Seuss cake or it's, you know, a Picasso. It just is.
Call a friend. I could have helped you at the greenhouse today.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
important too, right? Collaboration at times.
Yeah.
Sometimes collaboration is important. Cool.
Yeah.
My advice is different. Mine is don't buy any supplies. I have a lot of supplies. And I always thought the more supplies I buy, the more chance there will be that I'll touch my canvas. And I think, yes, I totally agree that obviously the better the supply, the easier it is to do your art. But I think there's a step before that, which is that noticing that your life is immersed in creativity before you even know it. And if you can get to yourself even in that, because I think of, you know, there could be moms of young kids listening who think, and I remember that stage, if anyone was trying to tell me I could carve out even 5 minutes, I would literally lose my shit, you know? So it was something where it was more noticing that part. And that's part of the reason I started that blog, was to notice even when my kids were choosing between a vanilla Girl Guide cookie and a chocolate Girl Guide cookie, that was a creative moment when they wanted both, you know, like it was like, they can have both. Yes, they could have half of each, you know? And so it's like noticing those creative moments. And then from there, those baby steps, instead of, I'm good at making these big announcements of wanting to change over my life to be super creative. And that's where I always get stuck. Whereas when I started taking baby steps was when it started to kind of roll into something bigger. And then when the momentum happens, it can sweep you. And that's the part that when you have a lot of those baby steps in place, when that momentum comes, you're ready to go. It's like opportunity meets preparedness, or whatever that quote is. that Oprah uses all the time. Like, it's not luck. It's like all these little mini moments that you've done where you've, you know, doodled here, or you've remembered how you organize this, or you're kind of somehow intentionally collecting some of those creative pieces, so that that big step isn't a big step. It's made up of 1,000 little steps.
I love that. You know, I think sometimes that collecting all of the supplies is a bit of actually just our avoidance and our resistance. You know, I think about people who like, I'm only going to go to the gym if I have the right pants and the bag and the bottle. Like, you know, we put all these obstacles often in our way of actually just stepping in. And I mean, obviously great art supplies are great art supplies, and that's wonderful to have. But I think it's often a moment to check in with oneself and say, is this coming from a place of avoidance and resistance of, I need this all to be perfect first? And what I know about life is that very rarely does it ever, you know, be perfect before I start something. And I think that's the other piece, right? Is it like, take those baby steps, take those moments, and also change your brain in some way, right? Realize that you already are creative. I think we have a tendency to tell ourselves often, I am not creative, I am not this, I am not that, I don't have time. And so one thing I often do with clients is ask them to become like a creativity hunter, or just start noticing how many times, like you said, choosing between which cookie you wanted. That was a moment of creation. Like that was a creative moment. If we can do that and start, we actually shift our brain into now becoming aware. It's the reticular activating system. Whatever you focus on, you're going to see more of, right? Buy a new car and suddenly you see that same car everywhere, right? You start focusing on noticing your moments of creativity, then suddenly you're going to become more and more aware and start to slide into them, I think, a bit easier. Cool.
And
how about for you, Natasza? What advice would you give people?
I will say that if you can create even a little space somewhere in your home where your supplies are already laid out and the space is there for you, that's super great. You don't have to, if you have a very short time that you feel a moment of inspiration come, you don't have to use that energy to create your space. It's already there. And even if there isn't anyone in your home that supports you to be creative, this space is there to support your creativity. And you could even make it quite sacred, like an altar or some kind of very inviting or sacred items that you have. So then you can almost like dive into the space, give yourself a time to jump into the space capsule and tune out of everything else just for the amount of time that you're able to give to it.
Actually, that's a really great suggestion, Natasza. I have Palo Santo in my studio, and the scent of it just drops me like that out of the rest of the world and into that space. Yeah.
Me too. I burn it sometimes as well.
Wonderful.
And a partner to help too. I think that helps. I know Dawn's really helped me.
What's that?
Like having a partner to help too, like having someone that nudges gently, I think, and allows that freedom of you in that moment. If it is a bad day, then you say no, kind of, and not, there's just no judgment, but constantly bringing it back up again to try to bring you back to a place that is like a taskmaster, but it's more like, hey, I'm going to be doing this anyways. Do you want to create with me? Kind of.
Yeah.
Because that's actually really helped me.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for both of us, we've had this really lovely experience of, you know, both of us coming into 2020 with this idea that we wanted to sort of focus on that this year, and met again by happenstance. And it's like, do you want to do this? Yeah, well, maybe. I'm like, no, seriously.
I said no, actually, but she's like, well, I'm going to take your number. And then I know your first response will be no, but I'm just going to let you know that I'm kind of introverted too. And that you can say no a few times, but eventually if you say yes, I'd like that too. And it was just such an easy opening, right? And she was right. I said no because it was like minus whatever 20.
Yeah.
No, I don't go out at minus 20.
Yeah. And you did drive in the snow though. That was pretty awesome that first time.
Because I made a commitment, because she had texted me 2 more times. I was like, you know what? because I did want to, because a part of you has to want it. And
Yeah.
a part of me did want it. And so when there is that opening and someone's holding that space and you can step into it. And I had been invited into a mastermind group of other artists in the community run through, it was art gallery or something, a bigger one. And I knew them probably as much as I would have known Dawn, like in passing kind of thing. And it was too many people, right? Like it was almost like I was accountable to 8, and that was just too much, just the heaviness of that. And so for me to be able to say no to 1 was kind of okay. On the days that I really didn't feel like it, I could say no, but it was also enough for me to say, hey, I also have this commitment to myself. So you know, there's only so long that Dawn's going to continue to ask and open up her studio and, you know, so.
And so this is wonderful piece here about holding space for what wants to emerge, and that as humans, we can do that for each other.
Yeah.
Right. Whether that's, you know, the 2 of you collaborating with your in-person or over Zoom, or Natasza, you joining on, you know, the vision train. Is that what it was? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. All about and partners and people in our lives holding space for us and allowing us to be who we are. Right. In that creative process. That's lovely. Wonderful. This has been incredibly enlightening. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add to this conversation tonight? Because I think wow, I'm pretty jazzed about it.
Well, I'm just very excited, Natasza, to meet you. Thank you for joining us. And Christina, I think it's really exciting that we can have this conversation and, you know, kind of bring art making out of this sort of mysterious, you know, space that, you know, makes people afraid. Like the creative process is just such a natural and beautiful place to be. And, you know, it's great when we can like bring it into the everyday. It's everyday magic, right?
Everyday magic. I love that.
And I'd like to also say that I really enjoyed meeting all of you, and that I appreciated to seeing your art as well. And I love seeing other people's art. And what always blows me away is that no matter what the quality or the technical level of the art is, when someone puts their all into creating a piece, it's really blowing away and opens my eyes to the genius of that person that and I didn't expect, and maybe I underestimated the person, but often I've had just been blown away, and then I'm in so much appreciation.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say, Shauna?
Just thank you. You know, thank you for the space and and even the conversation, because I think it helped me at least redefine that I want this in my life. And I think that's the one of the pieces is that you got to want it to be able to bring in all the other pieces. And this conversation, and even after you set the date, it just gave me a fuel and the momentum to get even more done, and it just a whole wave of other exciting new things happening. So
yay,
yeah.
Yay. Right, I love that. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart for this wonderful creative endeavor that we embarked upon this evening. And for those of you who are watching, I will add some more information if you want to connect with these artists. And I hope to see you on June 15th. I'll be back with Susan Fluick and Colette Freeman. We'll be talking about what is emerging in terms of love, codependency, trust, lots of other cool things. So I hope to see you all then. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.